My name is Sophia and I am 28 years old. Last Christmas Eve, I served homemade apple pie to my family while they laughed behind my back about something that would destroy everything I believed about loyalty and love. What I discovered that night about my own blood relatives would lead me down a path of calculated revenge that ultimately put me in possession of the very house they are now desperately trying not to lose. The sweet taste of that dessert turned bitter when I overheard the conversation that shattered my world, but the sweetness of justice that followed has been absolutely delicious. Before we dive into this wild family drama that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about blood being thicker than water, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from tonight? If you are ready for a story about family, betrayal calculated, revenge, and the most satisfying justice served cold, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this Christmas tale is about to get absolutely insane. The living room of my childhood home glowed with warm Christmas lights as I carried the freshly baked apple pie from the kitchen, the cinnamon scent filling the air. My parents Margaret and Robert sat on the burgundy leather couch with my older brother Michael and his wife Jessica. My younger sister Caroline lounged in the recliner, scrolling through her phone as usual. This was supposed to be our traditional Christmas Eve gathering, the one night of the year when our fractured family came together. I had spent the entire day cooking, preparing all their favorite dishes, trying to recreate the magic of Christmases past when we actually seemed like a real family. The turkey was perfectly golden, the stuffing was seasoned just right, and the pie was my grandmother's secret recipe that I had spent years perfecting. I wanted this night to be special, to remind everyone of what we used to have. As I approached the living room, I heard Michael's voice cutting through the holiday music. I still cannot believe she actually thinks she is getting anything when Mom and Dad are gone. I froze just outside the doorway, the pie trembling slightly in my hands. The girl has been playing house with us for years, Jessica added with a cruel laugh. Taking care of them, cooking, cleaning, thinking it means something. My mother's voice was the one that truly broke my heart. Sophia has always been so naive. She genuinely believes that being the good daughter will pay off somehow. Thank God we got everything transferred properly, my father chimed in. The house, the investments, the business accounts. Michael gets it all just like we planned. Caroline looked up from her phone long enough to add, "She is going to be so shocked when she finds out. All those years of playing nursemaid for nothing." The room erupted in laughter, the sound echoing off the walls like a twisted Christmas carol. I stood there invisible in my own family home, holding a pie I had made with love for people who saw me as nothing more than free domestic help. "She probably thinks we actually appreciate all that cooking and cleaning," Michael continued. "Like we could not just hire someone to do all that. The funniest part is how she turned down that job offer in Seattle to stay here and help us," my mother said, her voice dripping with amusement. "Remember, when she said family was more important than money? What an idiot." I remembered that job offer. It had been my dream position at a tech company with a salary that would have changed my entire life. But when Dad had his heart attack 2 years ago, I had chosen to stay. I had chosen family. I had chosen them. "She could have been making 6 figures by now," Jessica laughed. "Instead, she is here playing Cinderella." "Well, Cinderella eventually got her prince," Caroline said mockingly. "Sophia gets to keep playing house until we do not need her anymore." Speaking of which, my father's voice turned serious. "We should probably start encouraging her to find her own place soon. Once I retire next year, we will not need a live-in caretaker anymore." The pie slipped from my numb fingers, crashing to the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo through my soul. Apple fillings splattered across my shoes, and pieces of crust scattered like the fragments of my broken trust. "What was that?" my mother called out. I quickly knelt down, gathering the pieces with shaking hands. "Sorry," I called back, my voice somehow steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Just drop the dessert. I will clean it up." "Typical, Sophia," I heard Michael mutter, followed by more laughter. I spent the next 10 minutes on my hands and knees cleaning up the pie while listening to them continue their conversation about holiday plans, completely moving on from destroying my entire worldview. They discussed their upcoming vacation to Aspen, the one I had not been invited to. They talked about the new car they were buying, Michael using money from the business I had helped build by working unpaid overtime for 3 years. When I finally returned to the living room empty-handed, my mother looked up with fake concern. "No dessert tonight, sweetheart. It did not turn out right," I said, forcing a smile. "Maybe next time." "That is all right, dear," she said patronizingly. "You tried your best." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and hollow conversations. I sat there, watching these people who shared my DNA, realizing that I had been nothing more than hired help to them. Every sacrifice I had made, every opportunity I had given up, every late night I had spent caring for them when they were sick, it had all been a joke to them. When everyone finally left that night, I sat alone in the kitchen where I had spent countless hours cooking for people who saw me as their personal servant. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the clock that suddenly seemed to be counting down to something. I pulled out my laptop and started researching. If they thought they had played the perfect game, they were about to learn that they had severely underestimated their opponent. The good daughter they had been laughing at was about to become their worst nightmare. The next morning I woke up with a clarity I had never experienced before. The fog of denial and false hope had lifted completely, leaving behind a sharp, focused anger that felt almost refreshing. I made myself coffee in the kitchen where I had served my last meal as their unpaid servant, and I began to really think about my situation. For the first time in years, I looked at my life objectively. I had a master's degree in business administration that I had earned while working full-time to help support the family business. I had connections throughout the industry that I had cultivated during the 3 years I spent essentially running their operation while they took credit. I had skills, intelligence, and now, most importantly, I had motivation. I started by making a list of everything I knew about their financial situation. Having managed their books and handled their correspondence for years, I was probably more familiar with their assets than they were. The house was worth approximately $400,000. The business was valued at around $200,000. They had various investment accounts totaling another $300,000. On paper, they looked quite comfortable. But I also knew something they seemed to have forgotten in their arrogance. I knew where all the bodies were buried, so to speak. I knew about the tax discrepancies from 2 years ago that they had asked me to handle quietly. I knew about the insurance claims that had been slightly exaggerated. I knew about the business expenses that were not exactly business-related. I knew about the contractors who had been paid under the table for home renovations. Most importantly, I knew about the rental property they owned that they had never reported to the IRS. They had trusted me with all of this information because I was just stupid little Sophia who would never cause any trouble. I was the good daughter who would take their secrets to the grave out of misguided family loyalty. They had calculated correctly that I would never hurt them out of love. What they had not calculated was what I might do once that love turned to something else entirely. I spent the morning organizing every piece of evidence I had. Bank statements, email communications, receipts, contracts. I had access to everything because they had given me access to everything. They had made me their accomplice in all their small corruptions, never imagining that their accomplice might one day become their prosecutor. By noon, I had a comprehensive file that would make any forensic accountant weep with joy. But I was not going to hand this over to the authorities just yet. That would be too simple, too quick, too merciful. They wanted to play games with my life. I was going to show them what a real game looked like. I called the tech company in Seattle that had offered me the position 2 years earlier. The hiring manager, David Chen, remembered me immediately. "Sophia, I was just thinking about you last week. We ended up hiring 3 people to handle the workload we were hoping you would take on. Are you finally ready to join us?" "Actually, David, I have a different proposition for you. I am ready to start my own consulting firm, and I think you might be interested in being my first client." We talked for an hour about the services I could provide, and by the end of the call, I had a contract worth $50,000 for 6 months of work that I could do remotely. It was not the salary I had turned down, but it was a start, and more importantly, it was mine. Next, I called my college roommate Jennifer, who had become a successful real estate attorney in the city. We had stayed in touch over the years, and she had always told me I was wasting my talents playing house with my family. "Sophia, please tell me you are finally ready to leave that toxic situation." "I am ready to do more than leave, Jen. I need some legal advice about property transfers and business ownership." Hypothetically speaking, what would happen if someone discovered that their family had been committing tax fraud for several years? Hypothetically speaking, that someone would have a lot of leverage in any kind of legal proceeding. Are we talking about your family, Sophia? We are talking about justice, Jen. And I think it is long overdue. We arranged to meet the following week. Jennifer was going to help me understand exactly what legal options I had, and more importantly, she was going to help me understand how to use them strategically. That afternoon, I did something I had not done in years. I went shopping for myself. I bought a new business wardrobe, a new laptop, and a new phone. I was going to need the armor for the war I was about to wage, and I was going to look absolutely professional while I destroyed them. When my parents came home that evening, they found me in the living room working on my laptop. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" my mother asked. "Starting my consulting business," I said without looking up. "I have decided it is time to become more independent." My father looked pleased. "That sounds wonderful, Sophia. It will be good for you to get out there and make your own way." If only he knew that making my own way was going to involve dismantling everything he had built. "I will probably need to travel some for work," I continued. "I hope that will not be too inconvenient." "Not at all, dear," my mother said. "We can manage fine on our own." They had no idea that I was already 3 steps ahead of them. While they were planning my exit from their lives, I was planning something much more permanent for theirs. The good daughter was dead. What they were looking at now was their worst nightmare, wearing her face. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into building my new life with the same dedication I had once put into serving my family. The difference was that now every action I took was calculated to bring me closer to my ultimate goal. I was no longer working for their approval or their love. I was working for their destruction. My consulting business took off faster than I had expected. The contract with the Seattle tech company led to 3 more clients, and within a month I was making more money than I had ever seen in my life. More importantly, I was building a network of professional contacts who saw me as competent and valuable, a refreshing change from being seen as free labor. Jennifer and I met regularly to discuss the legal implications of what I had discovered about my family's financial activities. She introduced me to Marcus Thompson, a forensic accountant who specialized in tax fraud cases. Marcus reviewed my evidence with the enthusiasm of a kid in a candy store. "This is beautiful work, Sophia," he said, spreading the documents across his conference table. "You have essentially built a complete case for them. The unreported rental income alone could result in substantial penalties, but when you add in the fraudulent business expenses and the insurance irregularities, you are looking at potential criminal charges." "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" I asked. "For the IRS audit, once I file the complaint, they typically respond within 60 to 90 days. But here's the interesting part. If they cannot pay the penalties and back taxes immediately, the IRS can place liens on their assets, all of their assets." I felt a smile spread across my face. "Including the house, especially the house. Property is the first thing they go after because it cannot be hidden or moved." This was better than I had hoped. Not only would they face legal consequences for their actions, but they would also lose the very assets they had been so smug about keeping from me. But I was not done building my case. I knew that to truly destroy them, I needed to attack from multiple angles simultaneously. Financial ruin was just the beginning. I reached out to David Kim, a former colleague from the family business who had quit 2 years earlier after a dispute with Michael. David had always been professional with me, but I sensed there was more to his departure than he had shared publicly. "Sophia, I have to say, I am surprised to hear from you," David said when I called him. "I thought you were committed to that family business for life." Let us just say my perspective has evolved recently. I was hoping we could meet for coffee and discuss your experience working there. When we met the following day, David's story was even more damning than I had expected. He told me about the hostile work environment Michael had created, the discriminatory comments, and most importantly, the way the family had stolen his ideas and presented them as their own. "I should have sued them," David said bitterly. "I had documentation of everything, but I just wanted to get out and move on with my life." "What if I told you it might not be too late for justice?" I asked. David looked at me carefully. "What exactly are you planning, Sophia?" "I am planning to make sure that people who hurt others face consequences for their actions." Are you interested in being part of that? By the end of our conversation, David had agreed to provide testimony about the toxic workplace environment and the intellectual property theft. He also put me in touch with 2 other former employees who had similar stories. As winter turned to spring, I continued to live in the family home, playing the role of the dutiful daughter while secretly orchestrating their downfall. I cooked their meals and cleaned their house, all while gathering more evidence and building stronger cases against them. The most satisfying part was watching them become increasingly comfortable with their cruelty toward me. They stopped pretending to appreciate my efforts. Michael began making openly dismissive comments about my little consulting business. Jessica started giving me passive-aggressive feedback about my cooking. My parents began treating me more like hired help than a daughter, which was apparently how they had always seen me anyway. Sophia, dear my mother, said one evening in April, your father and I have been thinking that it might be time for you to find your own place. Now that you have your business, you can afford to be independent. Of course, Mom, I said sweetly. I have actually been looking at some properties. There is this beautiful house that just came on the market that I am very interested in. How wonderful, she said, clearly relieved. Where is it? Oh, you will see, I said with a smile. I think it will be a perfect fit. What I did not tell her was that the house I was interested in was the one we were currently sitting in, and that I was going to acquire it for a fraction of its value when the IRS seized it to cover their unpaid taxes. By May, all the pieces were in place. Marcus had filed his complaint with the IRS and the investigation had begun. David and the other former employees had filed their own complaints with the Department of Labor about workplace discrimination and wage theft. Jennifer had helped me structure my business in a way that would allow me to quickly purchase distressed properties at auction. The best part was that my family had no idea what was coming. They were so confident in their superiority, so secure in their belief that they had outsmarted everyone that they never suspected their naive daughter had been building a case against them for months. I was no longer the woman who had dropped that apple pie on Christmas Eve. I was no longer the daughter who had sacrificed her dreams for people who saw her as disposable. I was now a successful businesswoman with the resources, connections, and motivation to bring them down. And the most beautiful part, they were about to hand me everything I needed to finish the job. The first domino fell on a Tuesday morning in late June. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when my father's phone rang with a call from their accountant Harold Morrison. Even from across the room, I could hear Harold's panicked voice bleeding through the speaker. Robert, we have a serious problem. The IRS has frozen all your business accounts pending a fraud investigation. They are also placing liens on your personal property, including the house. I watched my father's face turn white as Harold continued, explaining the scope of the investigation. Unreported rental income spanning 5 years. Fraudulent business deductions, insurance fraud. The penalties alone were going to exceed $600,000, and that was before criminal charges were considered. This has to be some kind of mistake, my father stammered. Who would even report us? We have been careful about everything. I continued scrambling eggs, humming softly under my breath. It took every ounce of self-control not to smile. Within an hour, the house was in chaos. My mother was crying hysterically. Michael was screaming at everyone and demanding to know how this could have happened. Caroline was frantically calling her friends, trying to figure out where she could stay if they lost the house. Jessica was calculating how much money she could squeeze out of her parents before the well ran completely dry. There has to be someone behind this, Michael kept saying. The IRS does not just randomly audit people this thoroughly. Someone fed them information. If only he knew how right he was. The second wave hit that afternoon when the Department of Labor called about the complaints filed by David and the other former employees. Suddenly, the family business was facing investigations on multiple fronts. Wage theft, discriminatory practices, hostile work environment, intellectual property theft. Every ugly truth was coming to light. I do not understand, my mother wailed. Why is this all happening at once? Because we have enemies, Mom, Michael said darkly. Someone is coordinating this attack on us. I excused myself to take a business call, stepping outside where they could not hear me talking to Jennifer about the timeline for the property auction. The house should go up for sale within 90 days, she told me. With the amount they owe in penalties plus legal fees, they will never be able to match any reasonable bid. You could own that house for probably $200,000. Perfect, I said. Make sure you are ready to move quickly when the time comes. When I returned to the house, I found my family huddled around the dining room table, trying to figure out their legal options. They had already called 3 lawyers, but nobody wanted to take their case without a substantial retainer that they could no longer afford to pay. What about that money in the Cayman account? Caroline suggested. That money does not exist officially, my father snapped. If we touch it now, we will just give them more ammunition. I filed that information away for future reference. Even now, they were still hiding assets from the government. Over the next few weeks, I watched my family's world crumble with the same detached fascination of a scientist observing a controlled experiment. Each day brought new catastrophes. The business was shut down pending the investigation. Their credit cards were canceled. The mortgage company began foreclosure proceedings. Michael's wife Jessica filed for divorce, claiming she had no knowledge of any illegal activities and wanted to protect her own assets. The most satisfying moment came when Michael cornered me in the kitchen, one evening, his eyes wild with desperation. Sophia, I know we have not always treated you fairly, but we are family. You have to help us. You have your consulting business now. You must be making decent money. Could you loan us something to help with legal fees? I looked at this man who had laughed about my naivety just 6 months earlier, who had mocked my sacrifices and dismissed my contributions to their success. Now, he was begging me for help. I am sorry, Michael, I said with genuine sounding concern, but I am still building my business. I cannot afford to take on anyone else's financial obligations right now. But you live here for free, he said desperately. You save money on rent. Actually, I said calmly, I have been looking for my own place. I think it is time for me to become more independent, just like you all suggested. His face crumpled as the reality hit him. He had spent years convincing me that I was not really part of their family, and now I was taking him at his word. The third wave came in August, when Marcus's forensic investigation uncovered the offshore account Caroline had mentioned. The IRS was not amused to discover that the family had been hiding assets while claiming they could not afford to pay their penalties. Criminal charges were now almost inevitable. They are going to arrest us, my mother sobbed to me one evening. They are actually going to arrest us. I am sure it will work out, Mom, I said, patting her shoulder with false comfort. You always taught me that good people who work hard eventually get what they deserve. The irony was completely lost on her, but I savored it anyway. By September, the house was officially in foreclosure. My family was scrambling to find somewhere to live, but their destroyed credit and pending criminal charges made it nearly impossible to find anyone willing to rent to them. Michael was sleeping on a friend's couch. Caroline had moved in with her boyfriend's family. My parents were staying in a cheap motel, using what little cash they had left. Through it all, I continued living in the house, paying a small amount of rent to the court-appointed receiver who was managing the property pending the auction. I was the only stable element in the chaos I had created, and the satisfaction was intoxicating. The auction was scheduled for a crisp October morning, exactly 10 months after that Christmas Eve, when I had overheard their cruel laughter. I arrived at the courthouse steps wearing a tailored navy suit and carrying a briefcase containing a cashier's check for $300,000. It was more than enough to outbid anyone else who might be interested in a house with such a complicated legal history. My family was there too, looking haggard and desperate. They stood to the side watching strangers examine the property listing for their former home. My mother was crying quietly. My father stood with his shoulders slumped in defeat. Michael kept pacing back and forth, muttering angrily about the injustice of it all. They did not notice me at first. I had changed so much over the past year, not just my appearance, but my entire presence. The timid, eager-to-please daughter they had known was gone, replaced by a confident businesswoman who commanded attention when she walked into a room. When the bidding started, there were only 4 serious participants. A local real estate investor offered $150,000. A young couple looking for a fixer-upper went to $175,000. A property flipper pushed it to $200,000. Then, I made my bid, $250,000. The auctioneer looked surprised by the jump, but proceeded with the process. The other bidders quickly dropped out, unable or unwilling to compete at that level. Going once, going twice, sold to bidder number 7 for $250,000. It was only then that my family noticed me walking toward the registration table to complete the paperwork. The look of shock on their faces was worth every penny I had spent. "Sophia," my mother's voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Buying a house, Mom," I said cheerfully. "You remember how you said it was time for me to become independent? Well, I decided you were absolutely right." Michael's face went through several shades of red before settling on purple. "You bought our house. You actually bought our house." "I bought a house that was legally for sale due to the previous owner's financial irresponsibility," I corrected. "The fact that you used to live there is just a coincidence." "This is insane," Caroline said, her voice shrill with disbelief. "You cannot do this to us. We are your family." "You are absolutely right," I said, signing the final document. "You are my family. And you taught me that family looks out for themselves first." I learned that lesson very well. The next few weeks were a symphony of consequences, playing out exactly as I had orchestrated. The criminal charges were filed in November. My parents were arrested for tax evasion and fraud. Michael was charged with wage theft and discrimination. The local newspaper covered the story, extensively describing the fall of a prominent local business family. I moved into my new house the day after Thanksgiving, hiring professional movers to remove any remaining personal items that belonged to my family. I had them delivered to the motel where my parents were staying, along with a card that read, "Happy Thanksgiving. I hope you find what you are thankful for this year." The house itself needed surprisingly little work. I had always kept it immaculate during my years as their unpaid housekeeper. I simply redecorated, removing all traces of the people who had lived there before me and making it truly mine for the first time. My consulting business continued to thrive. The skills I had developed managing their affairs served me well in my professional life, and my client base grew steadily. By Christmas, I was making more money than the entire family had ever made from their business. The most satisfying part was watching how their relationships with each other deteriorated under pressure. Michael blamed his parents for getting him involved in illegal activities. Caroline blamed Michael for being a bad influence. My parents blamed everyone except themselves for their situation. Jessica's divorce went through quickly, and she made sure to tell anyone who would listen that she had always known there was something wrong with that family. She took half of Michael's remaining assets and disappeared back to her hometown. David Kim and the other former employees received substantial settlements from the Department of Labor case. David used his settlement money to start his own business, and he hired me as his consultant. We often joked about the irony of the situation. The family that had stolen his ideas was now funding his success through their court-ordered payments. By the new year, my family was completely scattered. Michael was working at a grocery store trying to rebuild his life while appealing his conviction. Caroline had moved across the country to escape the local scandal. My parents were facing 2 to 5 years in federal prison and had stopped speaking to most of their children. I meanwhile was living in the house where I had grown up, but for the first time in my life it actually felt like home. Every room that had once echoed with their laughter about my naivety now belonged completely to me. The kitchen where I had spent countless hours cooking for people who did not appreciate me was now where I prepared meals for my friends and business associates who valued my company. The symmetry was beautiful. They had planned to leave me with nothing while keeping everything for themselves. Instead, I had everything while they had nothing. They had laughed at my loyalty and sacrifice, never imagining that those same qualities would enable me to plan their destruction so meticulously. 1 year after that fateful Christmas Eve, I hosted my own holiday gathering in what was now officially my house. The guest list could not have been more different from the family dinners of my past. Jennifer was there with her husband and children. David Kim brought his new girlfriend. Marcus Thompson came with his wife. Harold Morrison, who had become a friend after helping me navigate the legal aftermath, brought homemade wine. These were people who had chosen to be in my life, just as I had chosen to be in theirs. There was no obligation, no guilt, no manipulation, just genuine affection and mutual respect. As I looked around the dining room table, where my family had once plotted to exclude me from their future, I realized that I had built something far more valuable than what they had tried to deny me. The conversation that evening was filled with laughter, but it was the kind of laughter that lifted people up rather than tearing them down. We talked about business successes, travel plans, and shared dreams. When David mentioned how proud he was of the company he had built with his settlement money, everyone at the table celebrated his achievement. When Jennifer's daughter showed us her art project, we all admired her creativity genuinely. "You know what I love most about this house," Jennifer said as we moved to the living room after dinner. "It feels like a home now. It has warmth that was never here before." She was right. The house had the same bones, the same rooms, even much of the same furniture, but it felt completely different. The toxic energy that had poisoned every corner for decades was gone, replaced by something authentic and welcoming. As the evening wound down, Marcus pulled me aside. "I have to ask you something that has been on my mind for months. Do you ever regret what you did to your family?" I considered his question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary," I said finally. "I regret that people who were supposed to love me could be so cruel and calculating. But I do not regret holding them accountable for their actions. They made their choices, and choices have consequences. Even for family, especially for family," I said firmly. "Family should be held to a higher standard, not a lower one. They taught me that blood relationship does not automatically create love or loyalty. Those things have to be earned and maintained through actions, not just assumed because you share DNA." After everyone left that night, I sat alone in my living room, looking at the Christmas tree I had decorated myself with ornaments I had chosen because they brought me joy, not because they matched some family tradition. The silence was peaceful rather than lonely, filled with contentment instead of resentment. My phone buzzed with a text message from Caroline. She had been reaching out sporadically since the trial ended, trying to rebuild some kind of relationship. Tonight's message read, "I saw on social media that you had people over for Christmas. I know things have been complicated between us, but I miss having family around the holidays. Would you ever consider letting me come visit?" I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and second chances. Then I typed back, "Family is not just about shared blood, Caroline. It is about shared values, mutual respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. When you are ready to offer those things authentically, we can talk about rebuilding a relationship. But until then, I am perfectly happy with the family I have chosen." I hit send, and then blocked her number. Some bridges were not worth rebuilding, especially when the other side had shown no real change or growth. The next morning, I received an email that made me smile. It was from a woman named Amanda who had read about my story in a business magazine article about successful entrepreneurs. She was dealing with her own toxic family situation and wanted advice about protecting herself legally and financially. "Your story gave me hope," she wrote. "I always thought I had to accept poor treatment from family because that is just how families work. But you showed me that I have other options. Could you mentor me through this process?" I realized that my experience had value beyond just my own healing. There were other people out there who were trapped in similar situations, believing they had no choice but to accept abuse from people who were supposed to love them. I could help them understand that they had power, that they could create boundaries, that they could build better lives. That day I started working on a book about my experience. Not for revenge or attention, but to help other people recognize toxic family dynamics and understand their options for protection and healing. I wanted to share the lessons I had learned about the difference between blood family and chosen family, about the importance of standing up for yourself even when it is difficult, and about the incredible freedom that comes with refusing to accept poor treatment just because it comes from relatives. 6 months later, when the book was published, it resonated with thousands of people who had similar experiences. I started getting invitations to speak at conferences and support groups. I appeared on podcasts and television shows, always emphasizing the same core message: you do not have to accept abuse just because it comes from family. The most meaningful response came from a young man who wrote to tell me that my story had given him the courage to leave an abusive family situation. "I always thought I was being dramatic," he wrote. "But you helped me understand that protecting myself was not selfish, it was necessary. Today, 3 years after that Christmas Eve revelation, I live in a house filled with love, respect, and genuine relationships. I run a successful business that allows me to help other people while building financial security for myself. I have friends who celebrate my successes and support me through challenges because they want to, not because they feel obligated. My biological family occasionally reaches out, usually when they need something or want to test whether I have gotten over their betrayal. I respond politely but firmly, maintaining boundaries that protect my peace and well-being. They lost the right to unconditional access to my life when they chose to treat me as disposable. The house that was once a symbol of their power over me is now a symbol of my independence and strength. Every room holds new memories now. Birthday parties with friends, business meetings with colleagues, quiet evenings reading in front of the fireplace. The kitchen where I once cooked meals for people who mocked my efforts is now where I prepare food for people who appreciate both the meals and the cook. Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to walk away from toxic family members? Or maybe you have experienced the sweet satisfaction of karma finally catching up with people who hurt you. I would love to hear your stories in the faces. Comments below. Your experiences might help someone else who is struggling with similar situations. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales about standing up for yourself and finding your own strength. And please share this with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better treatment, even from family members. Thank you for joining me on this journey from betrayal to empowerment. Remember, you get to choose who deserves access to your life, your love, and your energy. Sometimes the best family is the one you create for yourself, filled with people who see your worth and celebrate your success rather than trying to diminish it. Until next time, keep believing in your own value and never let anyone convince you to accept less than you deserve. V.